Hey, welcome everyone. We're ready to go ahead and get started. I know people are just entering the room here. Hi, Vineet. How are things?
Hey, Amrinder, I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, thank you for taking the time to be on this webinar. I think it's a very important topic. I'm really just can't really wait to get started here. Let me go ahead and share my screen as well. I mean, you taking the time from your busy schedule. I'm really appreciate it here. And while people take another moment to join here, I do see a lot of people are just joining in at the moment. So Vineet, I mean, you have a lot of expertise in this area. You've been the head of GMAT. You've had held positions at, leading banks like Capital One. You've held positions at OpenSky Fintech. You've held the positions at AdTalem. Tell me just a little bit about OpenSky Fintech. I've heard about it, but just tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, so OpenSky is the fintech division of Capital Bank, which is a local community bank based here in Maryland in the Rockville area. And I was brought on to essentially build a fintech business from ground up, focused on the underbanked and the underserved segment. So this is about 80, 90 million people across the US who are underbanked or have poor credit or no credit and develop essentially fintech solutions for fair and equitable access into the financial services market. So I built a product team from ground up or a business from ground up doing just that.
So, and also as the people are filing in, if you please don't mind, if you could quickly locate where the chat button is, and if you don't mind, can you quickly just drop in your city name that you're dialing in from in the chat box? That always helps us just see where people are coming in from while we go ahead and get this webinar started here. So, and Vineet, of course, with your background at GMAT, that itself is a very interesting sort of business. I'm sure a lot of people, even if they're not familiar with the organization, they're actually familiar with the exam itself. So I'm sure that was quite an interesting experience there, right?
Yeah, it was. It was, it was interesting to have worked and led a global business and understand, you know, the different reasons and motivations for why people take the GMAT. It was almost full circle for me because I took the GMAT exam several years ago as part of my application into business school when I moved to the US for my MBA. So it almost sort of felt surreal coming back to now managing that thing. Uh, More importantly, though, I think I joined GMAT at a time of significant transformation with competition in the marketplace and also, this move we fundamental sort of shift we had away from testing or assessments becoming optional and a move towards no testing in certain parts of the market. So there was a fundamental reshift and retooling of the business model per se, right? So not too dissimilar from the topic at hand. And so, when something is there, somebody or something is disrupting the business in such a fundamental way, how do you think about not just your business retooling, but also the impact around people, processes, and technology, and the kind of people that you need to operate in the new future that's going to exist, or you think is going to exist from that. So, yeah, it was an interesting time, and happy to share more about that as we get into the conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. So again, I think if you've just joined the conversation, please, if you can locate the chat box and just put the name of your city, it always helpful for us to see where people are calling in from. Now, depending upon your Zoom layout, you might see a chat box or you might see a Q&A. So whichever one you can find, just go ahead and try to put the questions there. And I see if you're raising the hand there, we'll lower the hands just at this point, but I think probably people are just trying this here. Kevin is dialing in, and I see Kevin. Okay, I'll wait for other people to put their questions here as well. While people are doing that, I'll quickly cover what we have to. What we're going to be talking about today here. So the entire conversation, there's so much here we have to get that I just can't wait to get started on this one. We want to talk about the entire spectrum of workforce planning, strategic workforce planning. What does it really mean? What is the urgency today in this entire AI revolution while we're in the midst of it? Vineet, I can't wait to see what you have, the thoughts that you have on that. how should we do these things, what are some of the enablers, and what are some of the real world insights and actions. And again, we'll be trying to go through both the software perspective on how to do things, but also the practitioner's perspective on what exactly are the content areas that you feed into it here. And while I'm looking through, people are putting in their Q&A. So people are pointing out the chat itself is disabled, but they're able to use through the Q&A box. That's perfect. So please go through, use the Q&A box here. Samuel calling in from Cape Town. People from Accra, Kenya. Okay, so we really have another person from Kenya. Okay, so please continue to put that. That always is very exciting for us. And I think considering the people who are posting, I think Vineet, because of your own background at the OpenSky Fintech, a lot of people might be asking you thick questions about that as well, because a lot of savings and banks kinds of customers might be interested in any insights from that.
Sure.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our very first poll question, because while we do this thing, I just want to make sure that we address the elephant in the room here. I think we need, at this point, every single webinar that we have, people have a sufficient focus, a very significant focus on what is the impact of AI. Is AI really going to be causing a lot of job losses? Is it going to create new jobs? And while people do understand that it's going to be some job creation, some jobs lost, the question really is from an overall net, the net perspective, is it going to be gain or loss here? So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll here. So please, if you can take 30 seconds to go ahead and post that so that we can keep the conversation going here. Your poll question should be on. So go ahead and answer it as quickly as possible here so we can keep going. All right, people are quite getting on it very quickly here. Oh, very interesting. I won't share what I'm seeing right now, but I will share as soon as I close the poll here. I don't want to affect what people are writing here. Okay, I'm going to give you guys maybe another 10 seconds here. So it's a short question, one question poll here. So go ahead and do that. And I'll take another moment and I'll close it now. All right. So if you did not have a chance to answer it, that's okay. There'll be another poll here a little bit later, but I just want you guys to see. I think, Vineet, if you can see, almost 40% of people are predicting that the net impact will be neutral, will not be too much job loss or gain, rather it's neutral. And on the job losses and gains, it's almost equal here.
Yeah.
And thankfully, nobody's not sure.
I love the fact that nobody picked not sure, right? That's always the easy and safe options. I love this group because people have a perspective, and I think it's great. It can be different, but it's not that, hey, I don't know. So
that is that's good. I think this is the first time I'm seeing that actually the almost neutral is the winner here. So that's good. I don't know, Vineet, if you had a perspective on this one. Did you want to comment on this results here?
Yeah, I think as I think about this and reflect on this, I mean, I think that makes sense, right? And I think we have to also think about, the types of jobs that will be created and what's needed. Also, these things may vary by different industry, right? So I think at a global level, it sort of seems right in terms of, there will obviously be, I wouldn't call it job loss. I think a way to think about it is retooling of the kind of work we do and how we do it. Now, is that a new job or a different job than the one I was doing, or new jobs are created? And I think that's I as a business leader, right? So I come at this from a business perspective, not from sort of I'm not in HR, but I'm thinking of this from a business perspective and the teams we need to build working with our HR partners. I think it's about what kind of roles do we need to create and adapt to allow businesses to be successful in the future?
I think that's exactly why I find your perspective to be very useful here, because while I'm able to share some of the HR perspective, but from your CEO hat, GM hat, the role that you've had at different places such as GMAT, that's really what I'm very interested in hearing. That's interesting. I think one of the aspects that people, I'm sure, are somewhat also affected by, and then we'll go on to the next item here, is that some of this AI expectations have been built so high that now suddenly people are finding somewhat difficult to keep mapping with those expectations. The recent ChatGPT 5, I don't know what's the right way to put it, debacle, this setback, minor hitch, bumpy road, or that's Sam Altman's words here. Um, Definitely planting a little bit of area doubt in people's minds, saying that, okay, when the ChatGPT 4 came out, people were very impressed by its human sounding words. Then ChatGPT 5 came out, people are a little bit disappointed because by ChatGPT 6, people were expecting that this will be sort of superhuman strength. But now with ChatGPT 5, and people are posting their own videos on giving ChatGPT 5 some minor analysis task and it missing pretty significant uh, insights that it should be able to derive from that, which does not seem to convey that it's not anything related to PhD strength. Now, could it also be some inflation that people wanted to get ChatGPT 5 out, so they released it 5, even though it wasn't really 5, it was 4.5, 4.5. Who knows at this point? I think there's a certain recalibrating of those assumptions and expectations is also happening here. But anyway, there's just a whole lot of no matter which way you look at it, which way you slice and dice, that is just workforce planning there are disruptive trends here, right? Now, people would say disruptive trends have been here since 2000, and people have only gotten busier and busier and busier. So this is another of those things here. But again, there is no doubting that there are at least 3 major shifts going on. At this point, I think the most interesting thing is that people say that the AI related roles still remain unfilled. People are having difficulty finding that. So which does lead some support for the option that people were choosing, saying, hey, there's no real net loss here. There might be retooling, I think, as you put it. There's some net job loss from automation, but still people finding jobs in the other places here. And there's just an overall rapid skill evolution, which is really what we are talking about here today. So workforces must continuously adapt. Vineet, in your most recent engagement at AdTalem and other places, how did you see this skill evolution part really play out?
Yeah, so it was, as we were thinking about AdTalem and the impact AI was going to have, or, the scenarios of the impact AI could have, you know, from a leadership perspective, it was important for us to, understand and be transparent about what we know and what we don't know, right? Oftentimes, I think to me that transparency and open communication with the larger organization is missed, right? And I think we need to keep in mind that, like everybody else, business leaders themselves are also working through this transformation and understanding what the impact means. And I think then sort of identifying the high criticality areas or high priority areas where there are fundamental shifts happening in the business or the way we run our business, people, processes, technology, right? What are the top skills that are must-haves, right? So your no regret moves. Like in the element of scenarios and uncertainties, I think it's for me as a leader, becomes important to start thinking about no regret or low regret moves that you can make. Sort of saying, okay, this seems here to stay, right? This I may or may not know a whole lot more about, right? Which of these LLMs is going to be the winner eventually, or here to stay? I don't know. There may be multiple. Go back to the browser wars, right? But at the end of the day, right, the fact that there will be a browser, the fact that there will be, touchscreen phones, I may not know which 2 or 3 or 4, but I need to start thinking about what kind of skills do I need now to operate in this environment, right? So for us, a lot of it was about understanding our data engineering and how do we integrate AI into some of our more repetitive tasks and what kind of skills we need to bring. So that's how we started thinking about is this notion of scenario planning and no regret moves we could make that were not beholden to which of these scenarios played out.
So Vineet, I think I like how you talked about it. I mean, about the no regret moves here. That is sort of directly answering the question which I was going to bring up here on what really is strategic workforce planning. And there are 2 points that you mentioned. I want to go back to both of them. First point that you mentioned is that, first of all, the executive management, the hat that you were wearing, is also working through these. It's not only HR that's working through this, but rather the exco is also working through it. And secondly, this notion of low regret moves here. So this is kind of what goes back to building some future ready capabilities and anticipating change, even though you don't know which one's going to really win out, but you do want to do that. So would you kind of agree with this is sort of what leaders today should be doing, whether they are CHROs or they are CEOs? Is that what they should really be looking at here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, I love this first sentence here, right? It is a business aligned process, right? So it's not something that business does and hands over as a strategy document saying this is what we need to do and hand off. It's not something that HR and HR leaders can do in a vacuum. I think to me, this is a very strategic place where I think HR teams have an amazing opportunity to step up and really strengthen that relationship between business and HR, and truly show up as HR partners around, okay, invest the time to understand what's happening in the business and how that could shift and what does that mean for workforce management, talent planning, people management, etc. Right? So that it needs to be even more tightly integrated. And again, I don't know for the people on the call like how tightly integrated the HR function is with the business functions, but I think wherever it is, it needs to be a lot more tightly integrated. I think that to me is fundamental. And I think the second point around, I think you start to sort of build about this, right? It is, I think it's important to start in the world of uncertainty, it becomes important to start thinking in terms of scenarios and probabilities. And I think it's important to start thinking about, hey, these are different types of scenarios. And I'll just use an example for to make a point, right? A 10% automation example versus a 90% automation example on a business process. Let's call it customer support, for example, or customer underwriting in the case of fintech, right? What does that mean in terms of skills you need and people you need, right? Now, you may think about it in terms of, well, if I have 90% automation, I need 60% fewer people or whatever, right? I like to think about it in terms of, well, that's freed up people to focus on other things. I can actually, with automation, service 300% more people than I need 60% fewer people on my team, right? So it's a way to also pivot the thinking around growth mindset versus a reduction mindset of, I need to eliminate roles versus, well, what more I can do and how can I use this talent better? So I I've always sort of found value in thinking around scenarios and probabilities and building these sort of scenario planning exercises, which is, I think, where you're sort of going with, with this notion around business aligned processes and having HR sort of an important partner in this process.
That's great. So see, if you go to the first one here that you mentioned, the business aligned process, and I'll go to the next slide because it really talks about the same thing here. This really is CHRO's dilemma that, like you said, I mean, ultimately, most of the people who are here on the call, they are HR leaders. They could be CHROs, but if you're a director of HR and that's your highest role, from my perspective, that's the role that you're playing. And like Vineet mentioned, the whole idea is that the HR should be aligned with the business, making sure this is an opportunity. Vineet, I'm almost going to ask you to repeat that because it's such a nice line that you said. I almost wanted to get it framed here. It's an opportunity for the HR to really step up and say, hey, we know that the business is changing. Let's make sure we do X, Y, and Z to do that, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, from ClayHR perspective, that's the main ClayHR mission, is to allow the HR to be a driver of the key business outcomes. So for almost all the people who are on the call, who are coming from the HR, and you're the HR leaders within your organization, as you see these winds of change within the organization, within your organization, but also across the entire industry, this is a great opportunity. This is a great opportunity. I know we'll talk about some specific capabilities to allow you to do that, but this is just a great opportunity for you to already be mindful of where the business is wanting to go, and the pivot that you mentioned here, going from maybe from redundancy mindset to the growth mindset. So this is a great opportunity for HR. I mean, this could in fact be a key break that the HR could really leverage here. I don't know, Vineet, if you want to comment on that, or if you want me to go to a key software capability. I think I saw that you were.
Yeah, I mean, I think just sort of reiterating what you said, right? And I think it's this last bullet point that you have here, I think is really important, right? And I think that's where, as you think about, you know, what partners like ClayHR and others can do, right? It's helping with this mindset. And I think I love the word mindset you had on the previous slide, right? It's not about a function. It's really a mindset, right? It's about how do you start with this mindset of being intentional about it and using data to drive and guide decision making, right? And I think that becomes important because in an environment of change and uncertainty, right? What can we all anchor around? It's around what do we know and what do we not know and what's the data telling us, right? And the perspective that you have around it.
So I'm going to present the software perspective for a minute here, and then we'll pivot back to you, Vineet, because I'll share with you what I normally see play out in these kinds of conversations as customers are sort of launching. So I'm going to talk about the first key capability here, which is just this generic competency matrix kind of capability. And with this capability, what organizations do is allow people to visualize where their team stands right today. Now, I put the word their team in quotes because the word their team could really vary. If I'm a manager, then I'm really interested in my team, people who are reporting to me. That's all I have my charter for. I don't necessarily have room to look at 76 other people who are not within my team, but other teams. But if I'm a division leader, if I'm a department manager, or I'm a division manager, then I want to see everybody within my division. And if I'm HR, I really want to see everybody. And then maybe I want to filter by, hey, how are people doing by their different competency types? I don't want to see all the HR and finance people together. I want to see HR by their HR competency types. So there's a little bit of segmentation of competency types here. So firstly, when people come across this idea of competency matrix and they say, okay, I know what it can do, and I know how I can slice and dice the population, as well as the key competencies that they should be looking at, and I can create the different views here. Okay, so I create my view so I can come back to that, and I can see some overall, some overarching statistics. That's the sort of the technical capability, the software capability. But immediately the next question comes back to what are the competencies you should be looking at, and even before, how frequently and with what different charters people should be looking at. So I'm going to turn that back to you, but I'll just mention the software capability here. We need that this is basically where people are using both the competency management framework, the competency management system, to be able to do track exactly where their team stands. And there are many scenarios that we have seen within our within ClayHR customers having significant savings from their right investment in the CMS. But I'll turn it back to the practitioner's dilemma here. One, how should they even be segmenting the population? What is the role that the division managers should play? What is the role that the managers should play? What skills should they put into this thing? Because again, that's not so much for the software to decide. When I normally see this part here, when I'm not normally in these implementation meetings and rollout meetings, firstly, the conversation starts here. It kind of like people look at, oh, it's very nice capability. I know what I can do. And then immediately it goes here saying, okay, now let's go to the hard question. I'm like, well, that's, it's time for me to have my coffee, because that's really, a lot that you guys have to sort through here. But Vineet, I'm interested in seeing, as you kind of go back to the hats that you have worn at different places, again, going to all of those different organizations where you've had the chance to serve, how would you think about how to use this capability, operationalize it?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. So first of all, thank you for sort of sharing this demo, right? And I think to me it's not really not just an HR tool, right? It becomes an important part of strategic as you talk about as a workforce planning and understanding where you want to take talent and skills overall, right? So and I think we use the term skill and competency interchangeably, but in my mind, they're different things,
That's
right? And I
right.
think we need to sort of think through that, right? I think that's also an important facet to performance management. I think too often we tend to focus almost exclusively on one versus the other, generally biases towards skills, right? Or versus competency. And I think that to me as a business leader, that balance becomes an important one as you think about reskilling and retooling and re-energizing the workforce for the future, right? As a leader, I will say one thing, right? An observation I'll make is, we've in the last, I would say, especially 5 years, at some of the businesses I've been in, have gone through growth and fundamental transformation, right? For us, things like grit and resilience and learnability sort of have become really dominant competencies, sometimes even surpassing the weightage we place on certain core skills, right? And again, you're a customer service person, they need to have certain skills to be a customer service person. A fraud person needs to have certain tangible skills. But at the end of the day, you're thinking about resilience, learnability, adaptability, right? Those competencies, become more important, especially as you navigate through leading in uncertain times, right? So that's just an observation. I think the other thing around, you know, um, what to introduce, what to retire. There's no perfect answer here, right? But I think you want to maintain some level of continuity, right? You don't want to be changing skill and competency matrices and frameworks every year, every few years, but they do need to reflect the reality of what's happening in the business and business priorities and where you want to take your teams, right? So again, I'm just using this as an example, right? So at most of our past organizations, if you have you know, 5 or 6 sort of dimensions to skills and competencies in the matrix, sometimes a little bit more than that. You don't want to change more than 1 or 2 at a time, right? That reflect the changing needs and the evolution of the business, right? So, you introduce a new competency, let's say around learnability or adaptability. If it's not there, you give one up or integrate them, but you don't want to make wide scale changes to the framework just because the world is changing so frequently, right? I think that's an important thing to consider. I think the other important thing around this is communication, right? Because at the end of the day, right, performance management, skill evaluation, talent building, sort of, career progression, they're very personal, right? At the end of the day, like we as HR and business leaders, like we think of it as 50 people, 100 people, but at the end of the day, for the individual, it is just them, right? They themselves matter. That's the only thing that matters to them, right? And then these things have deep personal impacts on people's lives, their jobs, their careers. So I think trust, like communication, becomes a really important part of this, right? It's not, in my mind, a lot of these things go bad, not because you had the wrong framework or you added too many skills or took away too many skills. It's the communication and the process of engagement you have with your teams around it. I think that's an equally important part of when you're shifting and evolving these frameworks as a practitioner and an HR leader is the communication you build with business leaders and the workforce that you're enabling around this. So again, I don't think there's a magic answer here, Amrinder, right? In terms of the skills need to reflect the needs of the business, and as it's shifting, I think a balance between skills and competencies is a move in the desirable direction. And then what you're introducing and retire, I think that needs to be manageable. I would say, you don't need wide scale shifts to this framework, but you do need to reflect addition and integration or deletion of skills. I don't know, 10, 20%. Right? You don't want 50% of this framework to start looking different every year, right? I think that's too much for people to learn, manage, and execute over time.
Got it. So I think there are a few things that you touched upon. I want to, by the way, in the past webinar that we had about a month ago, we talked about exactly how to integrate the competency frameworks with the performance management system. And in this today's webinar, as you may recall, we kind of on the left-hand menu, we're only focusing on one thing because just to make sure we can cover that topic. So that part we discussed, but on the topic of the change, I heard from another business leader, a CIO, coincidentally based in Accra. I know many people are dialing in from Accra today, who shared this interesting nugget. Now, I do not know how much seriousness they meant, but I really liked it, so I'm going to repeat it here. I said, how much of these competencies do you think should change? And he said, again, I do not know how much serious, but it came out very funny. He says, you should look at the you should look at the GDP and how much GDP is changing. Your skill matrix should change like that. I said, oh, okay, so about 4 or 5%. He says, yeah, but I don't really mean at the country level. I mean even at the organization level. So I'm sure that part of it was joke, but part of it was a reflection of the fact that, hey, if your organization is really going through a certain evolution here, it's really going it it is going through a certain period of transformation, then certainly you will have to make more changes here.
Yeah,
Versus
and
if you're running.
I think that's an important point, right? You as leaders, and I think that's our role and the burden we bear as leaders is you have to make some calls, right? You have to make some calls, and I think that scenario planning can help around. You talk about not where the puck is, but where the puck is going, right? You have to make certain calls, and I think these frameworks need to reflect your view as a leader on where you think the world is going to be 2, 3, 5 years from now. I know that feels like eternity in today's situation, but you do need to make some judgment calls, and I think these frameworks need to reflect that. Is the move to the future, not reflecting back on the past. I think too often we look back. I know performance management is a looking back exercise, but talent management is a looking forward exercise, right? And it needs to reflect the changing business.
Because I think you used a very, very, very American expression. I'm just gonna put it here in the chat for everyone. Where the puck is from a reference to hockey here.
Yeah, or it could be, soccer, right, or football, right? Not where the ball is, where the ball is going, right? It's really meant to denote, right,
I think that's
anticipating the
really what
next
you meant
move.
to say, because
Yeah,
everybody here plays soccer. So not where the ball is, but where it's going. Okay,
yeah.
so there we fixed that typo for you in it. So 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 let's go to our next main point here, the final segment here. I'm gonna ask, but before that, we have a quick poll question here, which says, what's your biggest workforce planning concern? And right after that, I'm gonna go into the last main segment here. Let me quickly bring up the poll here, if we can figure out where to go. And I see that here. Okay, so you should be able to, again, let's just take 20, 25, 30 seconds here for this poll question, so we can leave most of our time for the conversation here. So please go ahead and answer the poll question 2. If you have already answered, thank you. But if you have not yet answered, just go ahead and take a few minutes here to answer the poll question 2, so we can keep going here. Again, the question here is, what's your biggest workforce planning concern? Is it about the talent gaps, rapid technology disruption, the lack of future-ready roles? Okay, so we'll give people maybe 10 more seconds here to answer. So this auction is closing in 4 seconds. And I guess you are a winner. All right. So I'm going to share the results here. I have not yet processed them, Vineet. I don't know what you see, but I think most people seem to be saying are interesting around the widening talent gaps. Not a majority, but still the highest population voting for. So very little people asking, saying that there's limited visibility. They're saying visibility is not the issue.
Yeah.
Rather, the widening talent gap, followed by lack of future-ready roles, followed by ineffective succession or leadership planning. Interesting.
Yeah. I think it doesn't surprise me. I think the top two, widening talent gap and lack of future ready roles, they kind of go together, right? In terms of, where are we and what do we need to get to, and what do we need to get to, and the gap that we are, like, that gap is widening at a faster pace because of what's shifting, and we can't cope up, right? And where we can't keep pace, right? I think that's really what it gets to. So that's interesting, and though not completely surprising.
Interesting. I'm going to go on to the next and the final segment here. which is around the software perspective around career planning. And you already touched upon it, Vineet, when you said that, hey, from the manager perspective, you might be looking at 7 people. From a division leader, you might be looking at 250. But from an individual's perspective, they have to make one personal choice, which is going to have significant implications for themselves, their family, and their future well-being. So I think that's definitely part here. So now let's think about the career planning for a second here. Let's suppose you are a person's looking at their own role here. They say, okay, I'm here, and this is my next step. And this is where I could go to. And there's a graphic that shows up here a little bit above if you don't scroll down, but where you can see what sort of your career trajectory looks like. And then you can see what exactly is your level of readiness for this particular new role, and what are some of the ways that you can overcome those gaps here by taking certain learnings as well as by talking to the other people. Now, and again, I'll share, this is sort of the graphic I was referring to, where people can see where they can visualize their high level picture, as well as people can see from a succession planning perspective. If you are planning a succession for a certain person, you can see who are the other people, what's their level of readiness, things like that. Now, if we go back to an individual, if they're looking at their own particular trajectory, one word of advice, Vinny, that I'll ask from you is, what do you think the HR should be guiding their team members on, saying, hey, you should be doing this a check like this every month, so you can make sure that you don't stumble upon your next role, but you go there with intention. If you want to make a change, you can make that change also with thought process behind it. But what should be the guidance given by the HR for all the different team members to say, hey, this is the capability. You can log into your ClayHR platform and you can go to your career plan and you can see, but how frequently should they do it and what should they do with that information on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, Amrinder, right? So I don't think there is a perfect answer to this, right? I do think in the environment that we're operating in, these cycles, hang on one second. I'm sorry. I think these cycles need to be more frequent and shorter, right? So whether it's career planning, whether it's talent management, performance management, right? These cycles, like we've seen them moving from, let's say, annual to quarterly to monthly, right? If you were doing them quarterly, they're moving them to monthly. So I think they do need to be more frequent. I think that's one basic tenet. I think the other is that we have to be a little pragmatic and real around this, right? I think as leaders, we create a culture of openness, trust, transparency, but we also have to set fundamental expectation, and that's been always my expectation as a leader, that an individual owns their own development, right? You cannot sort of make somebody step into a new role, right? At the end of the day, it's the individual that needs to be motivated and drive their own learning and their own development, right? So putting a timeline on it almost seems artificial or forced at this point, right? I may not want to step into a leadership role for the next 2 months, for example, right? For whatever reason, right? Or I may want to actually be on an accelerated career development path in an organization, right? So some of it, I think, really depends on where the individual is in their career trajectory and where do they want to be, right? What's the path that they want to take? I mean, we're sort of all familiar with the traditional 9 box, right? There are some people who just want to be where they are, right? And then they don't want to look at career acceleration in any way, shape, or form, right? So, or at least at this point in time. So there's no sort of mantra here that says, this is how frequently you should be doing it or could be doing it. It's really dependent on that conversation around, okay, where do you want to be? And to some extent, what's the timeline and framework for not just skills and competencies, right? Because skills and competencies can help you from a training perspective. It's also experiences that you need to give people, right? Whether it's, let's say a rotation program that you build, or, you want to be a general manager, right? You don't get to be a general manager just by taking 5 trainings or doing this, right? It's about okay, to be a general manager, you need to pivot to certain functions that you need to manage, right? I want you to spend 6 months in marketing or running marketing. I want you to spend customer service a year or so, right? So I think it has to be a conscious choice around the timeline and not just the skills, but also, you talk about these inflection points around what are the experiences and perspectives you need to build to be ready for that next stage, right? An HR person, let's say, right? Somebody's a recruiter, right? They want to be an HR, CHRO at some point in time. They need to pick up stints and experiences, not just skills, but also real world experiences in workforce planning, in comp and ben, in performance management, L&D, for them to be able to be on that, right? So to put a timeline on that sort of feels artificial in some ways, but I think it's recognizing these steps need to be taken and working with an individual, with their manager and leadership to identify the opportunities to sort of say, okay, you may have an opportunity to now switch over to comp and ben to get that experience to help you train to be a CHRO at some point in time, right? And I think I want to introduce a concept here that we tried at our last company, right? And if it's okay, right? And then I want to sort of give a very tactical example. I think now we talk about the gig economy, right? For the most part, right? There's the gig economy and the gig workforce. So as a business leader, right, we introduced this notion, and I'm talking about something very tactical that folks can do tomorrow, is you don't always have to create a full scale role for somebody, right? So say, okay, this person moves, then I'll open a job opening and you can apply to it and get to that position, right? So we work with our business partners to say we all have more work to do than we can actually do it, right? So can we actually spin up literally gig projects, right? 6-week projects that allow somebody to say, I've always wanted to work in compensation and benefits, but my role doesn't allow me and I don't see a role opening up, right? So can I open up sort of gig projects in different parts of the organization that actually allow me to experience what working in a different part of the organization looks like, that allow me to experience, is this for me, that allow me to experience and build new skills, build new relationships in the company. And I would say, to me, right, that was probably as a business leader, one of the best things that I could have done for my teams and my workforce, right? It was such a big hit because people love this notion of short, bite-sized projects, right? I'm not changing my role. It's spending 4 weeks or 6 weeks on a real business problem, on a real business initiative, working in some different part of the company, learning new skills, figuring out if this is for me, and really almost working as a gig worker. And we had these sort of multiple gig projects that we spun up across our teams to allow people to upskill, reskill, learn new skills. Some of these projects were, on AI skills. Some of them were on prompt engineering. Some of them were on business, customer relationship management, customer support. So that's one way to sort of start thinking about, you know, um, I'm digressing a little bit or maybe moving a little
No,
forward ahead in the conversation, but I wanted to sort of
no,
bring forth an example of, how as business leaders, sort of I have thought about helping people. I think it also is energizing and motivating to people, sort of saying, okay, otherwise waiting for a role to open up is how can you create opportunities as HR leaders to create these pop-ups almost for people sort of say, to go and work and learn new skills and build new skills.
no, I in fact entirely like what you're saying. That's why I was just sharing with people here. I just switched over to a different screen here. Hopefully you can still all see my screen. That in ClayHR, for a lot of the organizations that do use these things here, super easy to create. Just recall to connect with what Vineet is sharing here. You can always create a job position, mark it as internal only if you want to go through that level of formality. If you don't even want to go through that, if you just open a gig project here through the gig project, you can always have a team member. Let's suppose this person is a UI UX developer, but let's suppose she always wanted to do something in marketing. You could say, okay, you have an additional role now for the next 6 months, for the next 6 weeks here. Let's suppose from the September 1 till let's make it till the end of October here, or 3 weeks here, to say, okay, you're also going to be a senior marketing analyst, and you're going to be reporting to Kevin here, who works in the marketing division, and that's your role. That's your role for the next 6 weeks here. So this kind of gig economy that I think, Vinny, that you're sharing, it's exactly on, and I think we recommend to everybody who has given it any thought to actually implement it. Implement it in a variety of ways. You can implement wherever you think it's easier for you. Just go ahead and create those things to give people the experiences. Like, like Vineet, you said that it's not only the people need those skills, but they also need that exact experience to be able to make sure that they're ready for the next
Yeah.
level here. So going back to one more question here on this thing here, I know we are coming to pretty much to the end of time here, but I just want to expand the question, Vinny, that you were talking about here with respect to gig economy, learning it, some of those things that we've discussed in the past. But I just also want to mention that this learning agility is such a competitive edge. Skills are changing pretty fast at this point. So therefore, if from a practitioner's perspective, when do you recommend for people to leave the comfort zone that they have? There's just the very same example that we took of this person who is a tech UI developer, but actually may want to be a marketing analyst. At a certain point, do you say, hey, yeah, maybe if that's really your calling, you should leave the comfort zone in a way that maybe minimizes your regret? Because you could say, hey, my pay scale was here. I've taken a pay cut to come here. Is it a good decision for me? Is it a long-term good decision for me? All of those things. How do you recommend people think through these? Because remember, Vineet, I think from the perspective of the people who are on the call, these are primarily HR people
Yeah.
who are either fielding questions from people when people ask them these questions, or are enabling frameworks for people to do these choices.
Yeah. So I think, I go back to the individual at the end of the day, right? I think we all, as business leaders, right, we serve our customers, but we also serve, the people we have on our teams, right? So in my mind, right, I think moving to a completely different role, like it's not for everybody. And not everybody is in the right, has the right, or the appropriate risk management or risk perspective to do that, right? Or tolerance, I should say. So I think you have to think about as leaders is how can I remove friction and barriers, right? How can I make it easy for people to make these shifts should they be interested and willing and capable to doing so, right? So the gig example that I mentioned, right, is a great example, is one way of doing it, right? Is creating cross-functional teams is another way, like pods, for example, for people moving away from individuals to team-based delivery and projects and performance evaluation is another way of doing it. How can I de-risk this for the individual that it lowers the entry barrier for them? Otherwise, shifting into a new role, shifting a job, shifting a company, shifting a home, these are high risk activities and not everybody wants to do that. So I think that's, as HR leaders, that's one of the most important thing I think folks can do is how can I make this low risk and low entry barrier for my teams, right? And I think that kind of helps get those first change leaders and risk takers into the process. And I think then that becomes a virtue cycle, sort of creating exercise and phenomenon is getting that entry barrier lower. I think when and how you want to leave the comfort zone, that's really a very deep personal question, right? But I would, as a leader, encourage and emphasize everybody to start thinking about what your comfort zone is and having very conscious conversations around how could you start stretching this comfort zone and start stepping around it. I think we all need to recognize that we are going through a fundamental sort of shift in terms of workforce planning and business planning and how business will be done in the future. A lot of it, post COVID, the world has shifted. Now, post AI, the world has shifted again. We see that across all the industries. So, I think creating a culture where it's okay to fail, it's okay to try out new things needs to be encouraged so that people feel comfortable stepping out of the comfort zone. Like my guidance and advice to people on my team has always been, always carve out 10-15% of your bandwidth to work on something that is completely unrelated to your job. And I've often done that as a leader is when I set goals for my reports about people who or report to me on my team, I always have this 10% on learnability or something new that you're going to do, right? And that's a way for a way for me to encourage them to start thinking about things that they want to do and where they want to invest time and making it safe for them, right? Because otherwise, as a person, I always say, well, I have so much work to do. I'm always busy. It never leaves time for me to try something new. Or if I try something new, I think somebody mentioned in the chat also, right? How am I being rewarded for it, right? What's in it for me besides just personal learning and growth, which I think is important, but can you make it part of the process itself so that you think about, okay, this is an expectation that I have. It also makes it safe for me to do new things because I know that I will be recognized for the effort, or and evaluated and recognized for the effort that I'm putting in. Again, I'm not saying this is for everybody. Every organization is different, but I'm just sharing an example of things that I have done, like things like gig projects, things like building an open goal, but having a conversation on what that open goal needs to be, but carving out time in somebody's workday to focus on something new that they want to learn and making it a structured part of your performance management framework or your talent planning framework or your reviews, whether you need to go take a course, learn some training, try out some time in a different role. I think having building that openness and transparency and structure, I think helps versus sort of saying, hey, I want you to go learn something about prompt engineering. I want you to learn something about RAG frameworks, or do this project on agentic AI when it's not part of your core job. And, you'll be like, I'm already stretched too much. I have more work to do now. It kind of just brings down the motivation level, right? So again, going back to how can I make it easy? How can I remove friction? How can I ease the entry barriers? These are things that, HR and business leaders can work together to make it easier for people, I should say.
Got it. Got it. So we do have quite a few questions here, but I just want to kind of wrap up at least the main portion here, and people can always reach out to Vineet via LinkedIn. You can always connect to me via LinkedIn. Many of the people on the call are connected to me. So if you need to reach out to Vineet, please just ask me or go through this link here. I'm going to try to get through as many questions as we can here. One of the questions that we have from Alice here is that, okay, we spend money on training and reskilling. How do we know it's actually working and giving us a return here?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one to answer. I'll admit it, right? But I think the one way to think about it um, is sort of shift, and I think it goes to training, but it goes to a lot of other things. Is shift to outcome oriented thing, right? So if you're doing a training, it's not just training for training's sake. What are the people or the business outcomes you're looking to influence by having people go through this training, right? So I'll give you an example, right? When one of the previous companies I worked at, we didn't have a product team. There was no notion of product management. We had everybody go through product management training. So some of it was just skill building, but a lot of it was also we had specific business outcomes tied to it, right? Saying, okay, after going through this training, my expectation is that the product team will have product roadmaps and product vision documents and requirements documents written in a way that makes sense to the business, that reflect the need of the business and the technology team they need. So there was a clear business outcome, or a business output that we had, and the training served to enable that business output versus just saying we are all going to shift to this and we're going to get everybody AI skilled. But at the end of the day, to do what, right? If I'm working on a different way to deliver customer service, and my business goal is that I'm going to have 30% of my customer service enabled through an AI chatbot, that training needs to enable that, and I'm going to tie it to a business outcome and measure that, right? That's one way to start thinking about it.
That's a good. I think that's a good example here of tying it to the business outcome. Vinith, you touched upon this one. I'm going to take this question from Samuel here. Saying you've talked about this like build versus buy. So the question here is, with AI taking over some of the tasks, creating new ones, how do we figure out which skills we should train our people, which ones we should hire from outside?
Yeah. I think that there's no perfect answer here, right? So, but I'll tell you some perspectives to keep in mind as you evaluate this, right? One is the notion of core skills and what drives competitive differentiation in the marketplace, right? So, what your business is about, what are some current and new skills you need to have to enable you to be competitive and differentiating in the marketplace, right? So if you're a fintech and you believe you have the best, most sophisticated underwriting process and technology and credit modeling, for example, right, to make lending decisions. That's probably something you want to continue to build and hold core in-house, right? Versus these less value functions that you do that it may be easier or less risky for you to get skills from the outside, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. I think the other thing to keep in mind is criticality versus time, right? If things are shifting so fundamentally, for example, in your business, there may be a case to be made for you need to get some certain skills right away because they pose some sort of a significant or an existential threat to your business, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. I think the third thing is the obsolescence, point of view on obsolescence, right? You don't want to, you know, invest in building core skills if you believe that the obsolescence risk on some of these, again, when you play out scenarios, right, some of the obsolescence risks on certain skills could be higher. That's a time when you sort of start thinking about, can I augment it with skills for hire, maybe for a shorter duration of time. So those are some perspectives to keep in mind as you evaluate these, build versus buy decisions.
Hmm. So I'll take the last question here from Linda, and I know we didn't get through all the questions here, but Linda's question here is on succession planning. I know we've had specific webinars on succession planning itself, but the question here is succession planning is tough in uncertain times. How do we make sure we have strong leaders ready for the future? And I'll quickly share the software perspective on it already. Like you, Linda, you might have seen in the succession planning webinar that essentially when you're in ClayHR, you go to the org chart, you say, okay, create succession plans for all the people at the top 4 layers, top 5 layers, etc. So at least you have a starting point here. But I'll give Vineet, I think, Vineet, let's take 30 seconds to kind of give this question before we wrap up the webinar
Yeah,
today.
sure. Thank you, Amrinder. I'll quickly wrap it. Right. So for me, succession planning is really more about building the leaders for tomorrow, right? So it's less about skills, more about competencies, right? So when I think about succession planning, I think about, you can always train for skill, but you got to hire for attitude, right? And you hire for competency. So I want to think about who are the people who are the risk takers, who raise their hand, right? Who are the people who are investing in themselves, right? Who are the people who are open, who have high learnability, high grit, high resilience. So I think thinking about a shift towards more competency driven metrics versus skill driven metrics is that creating more of that balance becomes really important in succession planning because you're dealing about leaders of tomorrow, even more uncertainty. So you may not even know what the future holds, right? So that's how I think about when I've groomed people on my team is, I can always train people for skill. Who are the people who show that learnability, high learnability quotient, high emotional quotient, high grit and resilience quotient.
Okay. I think that's pretty much all the questions we're going to be able to take today. I know there are quite a few more on the line here, but I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who was here today. Again, I'll try to summarize for everyone here what Vineet mentioned. Like, as you look through the capabilities, I know you guys went through some of the software capabilities, but again, the question from a CHR's perspective is, and the takeaway should be that, hey, you have a clear opportunity here to align with the business, to understand, to reflect on that this is a moment of change here. This is a time of change here. And if you can align with the business here, you really have a good opportunity to be able to come out as far ahead as possible here. Vineet, would you say I captured
Yeah,
your
absolutely. I think this is a great opportunity for HR leaders to, as I talked earlier, right, to really become even more embedded and tightly integrated with their business partners and really help lead the way in terms of thinking like the business leaders. I'll say as a business leader myself, like I'm really thinking about business metrics, right? Customers. And I think this is where I always lean upon my HR partners to help me think about and partner around people and what we need to do to plan for the future and build the team for the future, right? So I think this is really, I think a great opportunity to to show up even in a more stronger way as HR leaders and help. Like leading through uncertainty is a phenomenal skill, right? And I think we're all great. I find myself to be fortunate to be able to live through these times and build those capabilities.
wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vineet. Thank you, everyone.